Hi 645 class. This is your week 4 theory video. And in this video, I would like to review or if you haven't yet started working on shifting, introduce the basic principles of shifting. So I know many of you, of course, have been shifting for a while, but never hurts to review. And for those of you who have not started this yet, this is a great opportunity to start. So shifting is moving our hand between different positions on the violin. So we have spent, of course, the majority of our time playing in first position. And today I'm going to work on with you a shift between first position and third position. Third position is called third position because you put your first finger where third finger would go in first position. So first position is where your first finger is one step up from the open string. Second position is where your first finger is 2 steps up from the open string. Third position is where your first finger is 3 steps up from the open string, and so on and so forth. Some people have asked me how high you can go, what the highest position is, and I'll be honest with you that after much higher than certainly 10th position, the positions don't really matter anymore. But I think the highest I was ever able to count was like 15th position. So, you know, that's pretty high. But like I said, right now we're going to be dealing with between first and third position. And so I want to tell you a few things about shifting first before we do this. First of all, I'd like you to memorize, and those of you who have already learned these, I'd like you to review the 4 cardinal rules of shifting. Okay, and they are: rule number 1 is you have to know where you are coming from, or in other words, your departure note. Rule number 2 is you must know where you are going, your arrival note. Rule number 3 is leave early to arrive on time. And rule number 4 is no adjusting. Don't worry, I'm going to take you through all of these rules and we'll talk about each one. But those are the 4 rules. I'll say them again. Rule number 1, know where you're coming from. Rule number 2, know where you're going. Rule number 3, leave early to arrive on time. And rule number 4, no adjusting. So we'll talk about each one. And I will use our example shift from first position to third position to demonstrate. So we are going to practice this shift on the A string between the notes B and D. So first finger to third finger. And so rule number 1, know where you're coming from. Well, we're coming from the note B. But there's actually 5 pieces of information that we need to know. So, of course, we're coming from the note B. That's the note name. It is first finger on the A in first position, and it's a high 1, right? B flat would be low 1. Okay, so 5 pieces of information about that note. Then guess what? We need those same 5 pieces of information about where we're going. Now remember, third finger, if you have a third finger tape, that's low 3, which means that when you use 1 to play that note in third position, it's also low 1. So that's going to matter, the fact that we're coming from a high 1 to a low 1. Okay, so that D will be, again, first finger, because we're going to shift. It'll be in third position on the A string, the note D, and now it will be a low 1. Okay? So the last piece of information is sort of a little bonus. We already have 10 pieces of information for those 2 rules, and there's one more, which is the interval, the melodic interval from B to D, which I will just tell you right now is a minor third. When you're practicing a shift, it's a really good idea to play both notes in first position if you can. So I will play my departure note, which is B, and now I'm going to play my arrival note, but in first position. This is called the guide note. I like to use guide notes for several reasons. First of all, it tells my ears what to listen for. I know what my target is. Second of all, it shows my eyes exactly how far the shift is going to be. I can see where my 1 is, I can see where my 3 is, and I can see how far the distance is between them. Third, I can feel the distance in my hand. I can feel, oh, that's not very far. From 1 to 3 is not very far. Okay? So that's the guide note. And then, of course, I hear it's a minor third. I'll play it for you again. B, D. Okay? Now, the third rule, leave early to arrive on time. What that means is that we have to take the time for the shift from the departure note. Okay, so you will play the departure note, but you'll play it pretty short. And then you're going to use the rest of the time of the departure note to actually shift, to actually move your hand up the string. Okay, you will arrive at the arrival note on time. I do not want you to arrive at the arrival note early, but I also do not want you to arrive at the arrival note late. I want you to take all the time for the shift from the time allotted to the departure note and then arrive at the arrival note on time. The last rule, no adjusting, is extremely important because practicing shifting is very similar to target practice. So if we were in archery class, for example, and we were practicing shooting arrows at a target, and let's say that I'm practicing shooting arrows at a target, but I'm not even hitting the target. I'm way off to the left. And instead of fixing how I'm shooting the arrow, what I do is I go running up to the arrow and I grab it with my hand and then I just stick it by hand into the bullseye. Ta-da! Did I get a bullseye? What if I do that 8 or 9 times in a row? Have I practiced getting a bullseye? Have I gotten any better? No, of course not. I hope you're laughing because the example is silly, but it also is really a good illustration of why adjusting is such a bad thing to do, right? It's essentially cheating. Now, of course, I know you're not doing it to cheat, and I will warn you, I'm sure all of you are thinking, oh yeah, I won't adjust. Your hand is going to want to adjust real bad, okay? So you have to be very, very vigilant and not allow it to adjust. Instead of adjusting, just say out loud what your results are. So there are only 3 possible results with a shift. Either too high, sharp, too low, flat, or just right. That's it. All possible answers fit into those 3 categories. Too high, too low, or just right. Now, when we do the shift, as I mentioned before, you will play the departure note. You will then play the arrival note as a guide. Then you're going to play the departure note again, and you will play it very briefly. And then what you're going to do is you are going to, let me see if I can find an angle where you can see this. You're going to lift the weight out of the departure note, but leave it on the string. So it's going to stay touching the string, but just slide along the top. So you should be able to move your hand back and forth very easily. I don't know if you can hear this noise, but it sounds kind of like I'm wiping the string, which is exactly what I'm doing. Okay, so you press down to play the note, and then right away, you're going to lift the finger up so that it's just sitting on the string, and shift like that, and then when you arrive, you push the finger back down, and then you also put the weight back into the bow. So you do the same thing with the bow. So you play the note, play the guide. Then you play the note again, lift the weight out of the finger and the bow, slide up, and when you arrive, then you put the weight back into the finger and the weight back into the bow. Notice I am shifting from the elbow, okay? My left hand does not change position as I do this shift. Under no circumstances should you shift with the finger, okay? Let me show you that. This is a huge no-no. We never do that. We always shift. I call this shifting in a block. So in other words, your hand has to move kind of like a car, right? When a car moves, it doesn't stick out one wheel and then another wheel and then like people do when they're walking, okay? Instead, the entire car moves as one or none of it goes, right? You can't just move one wheel of the car. In the same way, you cannot just move your finger. You must move your entire hand, and it has to move from your elbow. So guess what? This comes from elevators. All right, so now we're going to start working on this together. I'd like you to grab your violin and your bow. And the first thing I want you to do is put your violin up in part 4 of Violin Workout. Haven't thought about that in a while, have you? I want you to find your magic X's and do some elevators up and down. Remember that up is toward the shoulder and down is toward the scroll. That is very important now because the shift up is toward the bridge or toward the shoulder of the violin or toward your face. And a shift down is away from all of that towards the scroll. So up, down, up, down, up, down. And this is the exact motion that you want to use when you're shifting. Okay, very nice and light, but I'm sliding up and down on my magic X's. So the good news is all of you learned how to do this many years ago. All right, please make sure you have a really good violin hold, that you've got a nice firm hold with your jaw and your shoulder, that the violin is comfortable, you don't feel like you're going to drop it, because you absolutely cannot hold on to the violin with your hand while you're shifting, okay? All right, So now we're going to try this shift together. So go ahead and put your violin up. Go ahead and check your part 4. Do a couple of nice magic X's elevators and find first position. Okay, now we're going to play the note B. 1 on the A string, high 1 on the A. Now, leave the B down and go ahead and play D with 3rd finger. That is your target. Now you're going to play B briefly and then lift the weight out of the bow and the finger and move the bow and slide the finger until you think you have reached 3rd position. And when you think you're there, put the finger back down and play the note with the bow. So here we are. Okay, now I want you to say your result out loud. Is it too high, sharp? Is it too low, flat? Or is it just right? Let's try it again. Uh-oh, that was too high. Okay, so this time I might try to make it a little too low. I don't want to make the same mistake a bunch of times in a row, or I'm actually practicing that mistake. Okay, so I'm going to try again. Okay, and indeed, too low. Hey, I hit it just right that time. Let's see if I can do it again. Indeed. Now, if you're unsure if you're playing that top note correctly, you can always check it with open D. Right? That note is also a D. It's an octave up from the open string. And so you can check the tuning that way. This is also something that we can, of course, touch base about in lessons. And so if you have any questions or you're struggling with this, feel free to, put it away for now, come back, try it again tomorrow, or feel free to just ask your questions in your lesson. Once you're pretty good at that shift up, though, then I want you to add in the shift down. Now, the deal with this is I only want you to add the shift down if you have correctly achieved the shift up, okay? Then to do the shift down, you're just going to, again, start on the D, but that will be your departure note now, and then you'll shift back down to the B. So let me show this to you. I start the exact same way as I did before. So I play my guide notes, so 1 and 3. Now I'm going to do the shift. And I got it correct, so now I can shift back down. Okay? Again, please don't try adding the downward shift until you're pretty good at the upward shift, because I don't want you to do the downward shift leaving from the wrong spot, right? That would also be like doing target practice but standing in the wrong spot. That's not really very helpful. Now, I mentioned to you that it was going to be a little bit tricky with the high one and then the low one, and so I do want to talk about that. When you have high one in first position, you can see, and high one in first position looks kind of like this, right? It's kind of an open tunnel. Your one is not terribly bent. And then when you shift to the 3rd position note, sorry, that was a little too high. This is a low one. You can see this is a much tighter tunnel. So here is my 1 in first position, and then here's my 1 in 3rd. So as I move from the elbow, I also have to bend my 1. Notice that my thumb in first position is behind my 1, but in 3rd position is kind of right alongside it. Again, that's because in first position I have a high 1, and then in 3rd position I have a low 1. So I'm going to do this for you a couple of times, and I want you to just watch. I'm going to do it first from this angle, but then also kind of from a backwards angle so you can see what I'm doing with my 1. Okay? So watch just for that high 1 and then low 1. That is hard to see from that angle. Let me try it this way. Yeah, that's better. Do you see how my 1 is more stretched out in first position? And then it's more bent in 3rd position. It's a subtle difference, but it really matters, and it's going to make doing that shift a lot easier for you. So, friends, As you're starting to work on shifting, if this is all brand new to you, please just start with practicing your elevators and practicing playing the 1 and the 3 and then the 1, 1 and announcing your results. That is plenty. If this is your first time really working on shifting, that's plenty. You don't need to add anything beyond that. If you have already been working on shifting, if this is a review for you, then certainly you can go further in the process. If you feel pretty comfortable with shifting, then please make sure you can do this whole process. And the great thing about this process is that you can apply it to any shift. All you have to do is identify the first 2 rules, right? What's the departure note and all the pieces of information about the departure note? What's the arrival note and all the pieces of information about the arrival note? And then you just practice the shift this exact same way. So I would be delighted to talk to any of you about applying that to other shifts in your lessons. Now, I will tell you that this doesn't work for 100% of shifts. If it's a really, really big shift, or if it's a shift from like a note on G string to a note on E string, that's kind of a different situation. But any of the shifts that you guys are going to encounter at this point are pretty much going to be doable with this system. So please make sure that you spend some time working on this and let me know if you have any questions. Good luck and happy practicing.